side and the implementation side. One of the last sort of projects I worked on had a lot to do with cash management and treasury, and I realized that it was a bit of a gap. Not just for SAP, but for ERP in general, the management of cash and the relationship with the banks can be a bit of a challenge. So hopefully today we're going to talk primarily about that connectivity to the banks and the reconciliation process, but we'll touch on a little bit of the other kind of cash management and treasury things that SAP can do. That includes, payments and cash flow forecasting. Now that was originally 30 seconds, but it was so painfully awkward I couldn't bring myself to actually do the 30-second version. But I've just wasted 15 seconds of your time, and I just wanted you to feel the pain, which you probably know well, of all of those little 15-second chunks that when you add them up, can produce a massive time spend and potentially therefore a massive ROI in terms of solving them when it comes to the manual processes in the finance system. And those challenges that create that time lag really come from a few key things, right? If you've got a few financial products going up to large numbers of financial products, and by financial products I mean bank accounts, PSPs, credit cards, etc., then you've got a lot of complexity there. You've got potentially transaction volumes, which add to that complexity and make the reconciliation process challenging. If you've got multiple currencies, you've got additional complexity to manage all of that. And then if you've got multiple legal entities, that's more complexity as well. When you put all of those things together, you're talking about a lot of complexity and a lot of manual processing and some big time lags in terms of the way that you manage everything on the sort of cash and transaction side. So you probably all know this process well, but today, the challenge from a reconciliation perspective in B1 is the data acquisition is very manual. You've got to download the bank statement, upload it into B1. You've often got to do some manipulation of that data. So the file formats, etc., that come out of the banks aren't always ready to go into the reconciliation. And so some manipulation of the data has to happen. Then once it's in, you've got a very manual matching process. Now, there are rules that can help, but they have a limit because they're very tightly parameterized, and so if there's any complexity in the reconciliation, they fall apart. And particularly if you get extra complexity like a PSP, that gets really difficult. And then lastly, the journal entries, the data entry is pretty manual, right? You're having to post those credits and debits, and you can waste huge amounts of time. There's a challenge around reliability. You've got a problem with audit there, which creates stress in the finance organization. And then, the biggest thing, the thing I talk about all the time is it's not just painful from an operational perspective in terms of the time spent, but you've got real delay in the insight. And you've got this big lag time between, the cash position changing and really knowing what the cash position has changed to. And so if you can move into a world where you solve that, you get away from these huge time spends and the lack of insight around cash. So the underlying cause of that is bank connectivity is really tough. And so, ERPs in general struggle with that. The automation has some real limitations on it because it's very parameterized, and that's really been the case until quite recently when AI has been able to really speed up that process. And then that fragmented cash view makes it difficult. And so all that Excel work, all of that data manipulation is just sucking energy out. So I think, Craig, we have a poll here. So are you able to pop that up? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how Embat solves those issues.
Sure, let me just find it here through you, Theo. 1 second.
Thanks very much. So hopefully in a minute you'll get the question pop up, and we can get some live feedback while we're on this call before we get into the Embat solution.
I can't seem to find it here, unfortunately, Theo. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
well, not to worry. We'll,
Um,
we'll publish the results afterwards. Easy enough. We'll crack on. And I like talking about Embat, so that's no issue.
Thank you.
So I think the way to think about Embat, and this is the critical thing, is that Embat sits between, on one side, all of the financial institutions, banks, PSPs, credit cards, loan accounts, whatever it might be, and has a live bi-directional connector into those. And on the other side, it's connected into B1, and it's got a live view of everything that's happening in B1. Once you've got a view of all of that data, you can pull it together, and then you can start to layer the tools and the AI over the top that really speed up the way that you work around cash. And we connect to just over 15,000 banks now. We connect to most of the leading payment gateways, and so we've got this real connectivity that makes all of this possible. And you'll see what comes out of that. And I'm going to give you a quick demo shortly. First thing is that connectivity and the data ingestion. That's the first thing we solved for. Everything else flows out of that. You get the data in and you can get it in the right format. You can really start to manipulate it and do clever things. Then I was talking about that tooling and AI. That's really about reconciliation that can be well up into the 95% plus automated matching. And then all of that data can be pushed through into cash flow forecasting, into your liquidity planning, you know, as necessary. So I'm going to jump into a demo now. I recorded this video a couple of days ago. It's only about 10 minutes, but I want to give you a sense of that flow. So just before I jump into it, you're going to see connectivity to the banks. You're going to see the reconciliation process, and I'll show you what that means in B1 as well. And then very quickly, we'll touch on payments and on cash flow forecasting. And obviously, this is a more sort of limited time schedule, but very happy to pick this up kind of offline with anyone and take you through it in a lot more detail. But hopefully, this just gives you a whistle-stop tour. So first thing to say is it's multi-factor authentication. It's single sign-on. You can connect to this from anywhere in the world. Oh, sorry. Um, as long as you've got an internet connection. And the first thing I want to do is just take you through how the system, if my video will play, works. So on the left, you can see all of the modules that make this up. And then the first thing I really want to focus on is that this is a multi-entity structure in the system. And so every entity can be segmented, and therefore you can consolidate as a whole group or partially consolidate a number of entities within that. And because the bank accounts are very much associated with the entities, that gives you the ability to roll up information, but it also gives you the ability to segment control. A CFO might want, a true view of the whole group, but you can control the finance team's access if they're regional, for example, into what they see. So first thing we're going to do is connect up the banks. And you can see here we've got all the different financial products, HSBC, an Amex card, Adyen for a PSP. But I'm going to connect something by API now. And API is our preferred method because it's real time. And if I look up HSBC here, you'll have many of you will have HSBC accounts. I can see all the HSBC accounts globally, but let's take the UK one. And all I'm going to do is enter my credentials and just want to show you how easy this is. Now, I don't have an HSBC login, so you'll see what happens. But if I enter my details as an HSBC user, then it's going to provide a token and it's going to allow me to pull all of that transaction data from HSBC into the system. And you can see our HSBC account here. And you can see all the different types of accounts. We've got checking accounts, lines of credit, loans, etc. And it's also pulling you the balances that you can see on the right, but also when they were last updated. And because this view is real time, it's updating live. The other thing to say is we can connect by any other sort. So if you have a bank in Latin America that perhaps doesn't have an API, we can also just take a more traditional file-based solution and pull that information in here. And as I said, we've got 15,000 banks, so there's a huge coverage in terms of how you do this. But the big thing this is giving you is all of the transaction data. And what you're looking at now is a consolidated list of all of the transactions from every single account consolidated into a single place. And it's pulling all of the, all of the attributes and data, and I can just hit update and I'll get an updated view of those transactions. You don't have to wait a day, upload a file, etc. And it's also been categorizing those, and I'm going to come back to the categorization in a minute. Now, this is my favorite screen of Embat because we're going to start to talk about reconciliation. And this screen is probably familiar, maybe in different formats, but basically familiar to everybody that's worked with ERP. On the left, you've got all of the transactions coming from all of the financial institutions. And on the right is the connectivity to B1. And we're pulling all of the open positions, all of the invoices, all of the APAR is sitting there. And we're able to match things up, right? So I can select something on the left, a transaction, very traditional view. But I can also post it directly to a GL. So this is a fees example. And I'm going to be able to pull the GL chart of accounts from B1, look for the appropriate GL and post it directly into the GL without having to go into B1. And we also pull the contacts across. So I can match up that way. But of course, the problem with that is it's very manual. And that's the challenge that we've already got. So maybe it's a nicer interface, but it's not solving the problem. The way we solve the problem is through a combination of rules, which you'll be familiar with, if X, do Y, but also with AI. And the AI is much better placed to handle some of the complexities. So what you're looking at here is on the grey, you're seeing the transaction from the bank, and in white underneath, you're seeing the either the associated invoice or you're seeing the suggested GL to post it to. And the system is just suggesting these to you using the rules and AI. And so this example says payroll, and so it's going to post it to remuneration pending payment GL account. Right? So the system suggests these to you, and then it can do this for, getting on for 99% of transactions. And therefore, as a finance operator, you're simply looking at the suggestions, selecting the ones that you want to post, and if I click post, it will post those directly into B1. It will close the positions and do the journal entry without you having to do any interaction there. So huge time saving. And you can see here, these are ones where the AI is doing this. So there's a little tell me symbol. Tell me is our AI agent, and you can think of them as a treasury analyst. But the AI is really clever because what makes this so different from the rules is that the AI can cope with things that fall outside of the immediate parameters of the rule. And a good example of that is what you've got on the screen in front of you, which is, if we take this one in the middle, we have a transaction where a payment is associated to two separate invoices. Now, in a traditional setting, the rules wouldn't cope with that because it's not an immediate match between the invoice and the payment. But of course, the AI is clever enough to cope with it, and it can be n to 1 or 1 to n, and so you can expand that relationship as far as you like, and that's how you get from 30-40% to 99%. So, as I said, there's nothing required in B1, but I just want to show you what happens in B1. So we recorded this just to have a look. So you can see this is an AP invoice. It's from Legal Tech Limited, and it's an open position. And we can see all of the data under the accounting, payment terms, etc., all of the things that you'd expect. And what I want to do is show you how closing that is going to relate to what's going on in Embat. So if I go into Embat, I can see here there's an invoice that the AI has suggested. It can see there's a legal tech invoice payment, and it can see the associated invoice. So it's matched that up, and it's saying, hey, user, do you think this is the correct match? And let's go ahead and post it because we know it is. And if I go in my history, you can see that we've made the posting, right? The AI has identified it and it's pending in the top right there. So a bit like a WhatsApp blue tick, it's pending for it's being closed out in B1. Now, that connection is being pushed across into B1, and you're going to see in a moment how that relates, right? And of course, I'm buying time because it takes about 30 seconds for the information to flow across into B1 and to close the position. But on the transaction here in B1, if I go ahead, you can see this is what it was before it was open, and if I refresh the page, then you'll see that the document is now closed because we've made the posting. And if I take you into the journal entry, you will see we have the credit and debit associated with that journal entry. So if you were a user of Embat, there's no need to go and do any of this, but I thought it was really important just to show you what's happening on the B1 side when you make that posting, and that connectivity allows us to do that. Now, if I go back in the history, you'll see now it's synchronized. We've got a double WhatsApp style blue tick, and the data's been fully recorded and closed out as a position. And you can see here I've got all this history of postings that I've done. It's a huge time saving because, as I say, it can be 99+% of what you're doing. So that's really reconciliation. And I'm just going to talk very quickly about how we equally manage payments and cash flow. So this is payments. And what you're looking at here is all of the open AP positions coming from B1. Now, I'm going to just select a couple of these. They can be, different beneficiaries. I can select an account to pay them from. I can see the balance of that account because I'm connected. I can select the transfer and I can notify these beneficiaries. Even though they're different beneficiaries, I can set this up to send them a notification to say, hey, we're going to make this payment. And what we're doing is taking the approval flow now, which you no longer would need to do in the bank. You can have a homogeneous process for managing all of the payments associated with the system. And I can type in here, new payment, and I'll send this off for an approval flow. Traditional approval structure, it can be and or however you need it. And once I've done that, I send it off for approval. And I just want to show you what you'd get as an approver here. I'd get an email saying, hey, you've got an approval. We don't charge for users, so this can be, as many people as you need in the business. And they can see the batch and they can go into Embat and they will log in and see the request that you would expect. Now, it requires a two-factor authentication because it's payments. There's obviously a lot more security here. And so on my phone, the text was coming through with the two-factor authentication. And if I type that in, it'll take me into the system. I can see the batch and I can say, yeah, I know what this is. I'm happy to make the payment. I can see all the details. Let's go ahead and make the payment. So I'll go ahead and approve this. Again, I'm going to get another two-factor authentication because of the limitations around payments. So I get the next authentication code, and I can do it through an authenticator app, or I can do it through mobile, but I'll type that in. And once I've done that, I verify and approve the payment. So approval's done, payment's been made. And when I go back now into the system as the user that was posting the payment, I can see what's in pending, right? What's been approved and what's going out. And if I look at the history, you can see all the history of what's been paid, were there any issues in transit, etc. And before I just move on to cash flow, I'll just talk about that because there's a couple of things that happen in payments that I think we often forget about. So when you take a file out of SAP, and we do the OK to pay XML file, there's a couple of problems with that. One, it can be tampered with, so there's a security challenge. But the other one is that it's marked as paid in the system. But of course, it's not paid until you've uploaded that document into the bank and made the payment. But in this scenario, because those two things are joined up, it's really only marked paid when it's actually been paid. And therefore, you don't land up with the issues in transit that mean you're unwinding the positions and having to reverse things constantly in the system. So there's some huge value there. And the last thing to say, which relates to reconciliation we did before, is if I know the AP document and I've made the payment from the bank, I can just reconcile that. So if payments talks to reconciliation, we can just close out the position. You don't need to push it for a traditional reconciliation process. So let's jump into cash flow. And this is what we looked at earlier. This is all of the transactions. And you can see here, I've categorized them, or not I have categorized them, the AI has categorized them. And it's saying, hey, this is cash flow from operations, payments or collections, whatever it might be. Once you've got these categorized, I can push them directly into a cash flow statement. And here, this is a historical cash flow statement. And if I drill down into any cell on the cash flow statement, I can see all of the transactions that make up that cell. And that's hugely valuable because it allows you to automate that process. It's obviously very manual. And there's a lot of value that I think that our customers take from this. And we often get requests, particularly companies that are being asked to do more cash flow and liquidity reporting will look at this. But the real value is, of course, you can forecast this forwards. And so if I just expand this, you'll see three colors here. I've got blue, purple, and black, right? Which is forecast, tell me, the AI agent, and then manual. So I'll just talk about those in order. So a forecast is a document that's in Business One, right? It's the best predictor of a cash flow change. So, that could be an OpenAP, OpenAR document, and you know roughly what's going to happen in 30 days' time. But of course, there's a limit there because it's only the documents available for 30 days. Tell me is really smart. Tell me can look at your cash flow over time. Imagine it's a point of sale, for example, and it can say, is there seasonality? How does this change over time? And it can start to do predictive analytics for that forwards cash flow. And then the manual entries mean that you can just treat this like an Excel and put manual data into the system. So if you are a group that's got 5 entities and you're doing a cash flow at the entity level and then trying to consolidate that, at the moment, that's a huge amount of work that is almost always done on Excel. But with this, you're able to control that process, homogenize it, and allow for consolidation very easily. And it also gives you a level of accuracy and a level of live data in your cash flow forecast that's hugely valuable. So we've seen 4 things. We've seen bank connectivity, we've seen the reconciliation, we've seen the payments, and we've seen the cash flow. And I'd say those are the sort of 4 main pillars. Embat can do lots of other things. It can do debt management. It can give you intercompany operations. It can give you a lot of reporting around your treasury function. But those are really the key areas I wanted to touch on. So I thought I'd just give you a quick example of a customer. And I'm really just in my last few slides now that you've seen the good bit, the demo, and then I'll take some questions. But Prodessa is a really good example of a B1 user. So they've got 120 financial products connected to Embat because they've got complexity in different countries, and that lack of visibility on the liquidity makes things really difficult for them to manage the cash. It's okay when you've got 2 bank accounts, but if you're 120 products, it becomes really hard to say, well, what is our actual cash position? CFO's asking for it, and there's a big lag. And so if you can bring that up to date, you can get a real-time view of the cash position, and therefore start to really, plan what you do going forwards with it. And we have real global coverage in terms of those banking relationships. So it's been a huge success story with Prodessa. We work with a lot of different customers. Some of them hopefully you'll know, like Treatwell, Pet Lab, Siemens, Northern Data, Fever. But very happy to talk about some of those examples in more detail. And on the right, you can see some of the partners we have. We partner with really big banks to provide a level of robust connectivity that is a real differentiator for us. But we also have connectivity to other systems. So very briefly, we've got nearly 200 billion, or just over 200 billion, of transactions flowing through the system. This is a few months out of date. We're well over 300 clients now. We're getting on for 400, and we've got banking relationships through those clients in more than 50 countries now. So we've got a huge amount of experience of managing that banking relationship. We've got local offices in UK, Germany, and Spain, and we're backed by some really big investors like Creandum, who were Spotify and Klarna's first investors. So, we're on a really great trajectory as a business. That's all I had to say. I think, my experience of working in the SAP world is this is an area that's really low-hanging fruit with customers. There's a small group that put their hand up and say, "Hey, I have a treasury problem," but almost people don't know the art of the possible. And when you go to them and you say, "Hey, bank connectivity, reconciliation, payments, and cash flow can be taken care of in a much more automated way, in much slicker approach," then people, it's been very gratifying working at Embat because people really bite your arm off to look at that stuff. So hopefully that's been useful and a bit of an insight into the way that we work. Really keen to get any of your questions, and equally very happy to speak offline and catch up on things. So I've got a couple of questions here in the chat, so I'll just go
Do
through
you want
them.
me to read them out for you, Theo, and you can
Yeah,
answer
go
them?
for it. Go for it.
Perfect. Awesome. First question is the cash flow report gets data from SAP B1. Is it not the same as standard cash flow statement inside B1?
Yeah, so B1 has some good cash flow reporting capabilities. The difference is the AI, basically. So you can just get to a level of accuracy, and you've also got the real-time feed. So you can do it two ways. You can pull the cash flow forecast you've already produced in B1 and then enhance it, or you can just pull the raw data and do it in Embat. We're completely agnostic as to how you do that. But the AI really helps you to get beyond that. And it's also very powerful when it comes to consolidation. I think people find that a real value add.
Perfect. Brilliant. I hope that answers your question. We've got another one. So regarding the rules to automate the payment reconciliation to the invoice, would you be able to provide example of data you can use to match the invoice automatically? How many rules can you have?
Sure. So uh, there's the question there is about payment reconciliation. When it comes to the payment side, if you're making a payment out of Embat, then it almost doesn't need a rule because you can say, I know the invoice and I know the payment associated with it, and I'm pushing the two out, and so I can reconcile it immediately. When it comes to the more traditional bank reconciliation, either it's a payment that you didn't do out of Embat or it's a payment that's come into the bank. We're doing a combination of the rules and the AI. Now, you can have an unlimited number of rules, and you can use any attribute that is either coming from B1, or you can use additional attributes that you can add should you wish to in Embat. But the problem with rules is you only ever get to 50% automation if you're really good at it, because the rules are so tightly parameterized that as soon as something unusual happens, they fall over. Right? And that's the challenge in B1 or in any ERP. And the difference here is the AI can look at all those attributes, and it's got the ability to make some value judgments about, well, I believe that these two match, and suggest it to you. And so there it's looking at every attribute that's available in B1 and every attribute that's coming from the bank and any attribute that you choose to add in Embat. And I can give you a really good example of how this becomes very powerful, right? So, a rule might only have a very tight time window where it can allow the two things to match together, or the exact values need to match. Well, people make mistakes. Maybe there's a tiny difference in the value. Maybe the payment run happened earlier than you thought. The AI can look at that and say, I still think they match. Do you agree? Right? And that's where you're able to just get into that much higher level.
Perfect. Brilliant. That covers all the questions. Does anyone have any more questions for Theo? think that I think that might be it.
Cool. Well, the other one I maybe get all the time, but didn't in the chat there is about timelines to do these things, and they're pretty quick projects to solve, which is why I think it's such low hanging fruit for customers or for partners that are looking at this. And maybe that's the last thing I just leave you all with, which is, you can achieve this in 6 to 12 weeks, right? Which is just from an ROI perspective really valuable because you can just achieve that connectivity at a speed with Embat that you can't elsewhere. So look, hopefully that's been very useful. As I say, very keen to connect on this topic. We're moving really fast in the SAP world, and it's probably our fastest growing customer base now. But excited to talk to all of you, and feel free to reach out. And thanks so much for giving up some time this morning to learn a bit more about it.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Theo. Thanks everyone for joining. As mentioned earlier, it has been recorded. The session will be uploaded to the website very shortly. Theo's details will be on there as well. If you do have any questions for himself or the Embat team, please do reach out. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.